a brief introduction to evaluating your dissemination products. So I will kick us off with this topic for today, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague Elena, and then Julianne is also on the call, and she will help to answer any questions that anyone might have. All right, so many of you indicated that you think it's quite important to evaluate. So this slide might be a bit redundant now, but I'm going to go through it anyway, just to add some value and some benefits to why you may want to evaluate the dissemination work you're doing. So the first is to see whether you're achieving your dissemination goals. Because we're all disseminating for a reason, and it is work, so it's very useful to see if the effort that you're putting into it is having the intended effect. Because otherwise it might be wise to switch it up or do something differently. The next reason to evaluate is to better reach your target audiences. And because reaching your target audiences is one of the main goals of dissemination, evaluating your work can give you valuable information about whether you are actually doing this and give you the opportunity to really improve how you do reach your audiences. The next reason to evaluate is to know what to prioritize, continue, or stop. Because once you've evaluated, you now have knowledge and data, and you can make decisions based on that information and data, and they can be informed decisions. So you have that backup you need to basically share why you're doing something and why you should continue doing it, or why you might want to deprioritize something. And in making these decisions, this goes to the next reason why you should evaluate, is that you'll save precious resources. Because we all have limited resources, limited time, money, personnel. So knowing what's working and what's not working can help you maximize the limited resources that you have. And lastly, which is especially important in the current climate that we're in, is to show impact. So you can have information now after evaluating that you can share with potential funders and current stakeholders to show the effect of your work, which can help validate why you're doing it or potentially help secure funding in the future. So we could essentially do an entire course like Dissemination Essentials on evaluation. But since that's not what we're doing, we're going to try and give you one simple tool and resource that you could use to try and evaluate the work that you are doing. There's plenty more information where evaluation comes from, and we will share a more robust resource at the end of this presentation. But for the purposes of today, we're going to walk you through a simple evaluation plan. So I'm going to very briefly describe what's on the screen right now, and then I'm going to pass it over to Elena, who's actually going to color it in for you and give you an example so you can see what this would look like in practice. So the intention here is to use this plan and fill it out like a template with any evaluation product or activity that you are doing. So the first thing you'd put in are any inputs you need to do the work. This includes resources, materials, and people. It may be stuff that you already have. It may be stuff that you might need, but it basically tells you all of the various pieces that you're going to need to put together to do the work. The next thing you'd fill out are the activities and outputs. So the activities are what you're actually doing with those resources, and the outputs is what you're creating. So perhaps the activity is to gather resources to create an infographic, and you might need various things for that. And then the output is the infographic that you've created. The next part of this plan are audiences and stakeholders. So here you would list anyone that you're trying to reach with the dissemination product or activity that you're creating. Next are outcomes. And this is where we start to get more into the evaluation territory. So this is the change you want to achieve, and it can be short, medium, or long-term. And the more you go through this as an exercise, the easier it will be to be able to decide what's a short, medium, or long-term outcome. So short-term would be something that you would be expected to see almost immediately as a result of doing what you've done. Medium could be something that's sort of in the interim, and long-term tend to be a bit idealistic in a way. There are things that are very difficult to measure, like improved health outcomes. or improved healthcare decision making, but they're basically grounding us in the ultimate goal of why we're doing what we're doing. And then the next two pieces are indicators of success, which are very strongly tied to outcomes. How do you know that you've reached that outcome? So you're coming up with very specific things that you'd have to measure to know whether or not you've reached your outcome. And then data collection tools and approaches, which is what you'll actually be doing to collect that data. So this is where the evaluation methodology comes into place. It's whether you're using interviews or whether you're using surveys or whether you're using Google Analytics, but these are the tools and approaches you will use to actually know whether you're reaching your outcomes or not. So that all probably sounds quite high level and quite a lot, but hopefully with the examples, you will be able to understand a bit more about how you can start small with this and hopefully use it towards the work that you are doing. So I'm going to pass it over to Elena to take you through that.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Kostova. I'm the managing editor of Cochrane Gynecology and Fertility Satellite. We are based in Amsterdam. I joined Cochrane around 3 years ago, and since the beginning, I've been helping our group with knowledge translation and dissemination. And today I want to give you a couple of examples how you can implement the simple evaluation plan. And just from the beginning, I want to say this is just one example of something we did. It's very simple, but yeah, I hope you find it useful. And in the end, we're going to have time for questions and discussions. So hopefully we can we can see how you can implement the examples we are giving. And thanks again, Stephanie, so much for the introduction of the simple evaluation plan. It was really clear, and each section of it was very well presented. So I'm not going to add more of the theory, but I'm just going to move immediately to our example. I'm going to start with the inputs. So assuming you're doing a dissemination product for Cochrane review, certainly a very important input is the Cochrane authors writing the review, and you will need someone to prepare the dissemination product. And in our group, that's me, the managing editor, but of course, this can differ for you depending on your resources. And then as activities and outputs, in the examples we're presenting here, we have prepared a blog shot and a social media post, a tweet. And what about audiences and stakeholders, right? Who are we doing this for? Who is our audience? This, of course, will differ depending on which group you are working with. In our case, since we're gynecology and fertility, this is, let's say, fertility doctors. And when we determine our audience and stakeholders, we're trying to be as specific as possible, even though that sometimes it's not very easy. In our plan, we have written, well, members of the public or people who are undergoing fertility treatment. And though this might be specific enough, it's not always very easy to measure, right? So it's also something to keep in mind and be realistic. And outcomes, this is, as Stephanie said, now it's starting to become even more interesting. And we would like to start with a short-term outcome or a change. I like to call this a goal. And our short-term goal is increase reach. So we post something and we want people to know about it. We want people to know that the review has been published. And what will be our indicator of success? Or as I like to call it, $1 million question. How will we know that we've been successful? In our example, we have, let's say, 2,000 people have seen the post and we have an altmetric score of 20. I'm going to tell you a bit more about this in a bit, about the altmetric score. But 2,000 people, how do we decide on this, right? That sounds like a random number. And that's a very good question. In our case, how did we decide on this? Say that you have posted something in the past and you received 1,000 views and now you want to double that. Or for example, you have 2,000 followers and you want that each of your followers in theory to have seen your post. But indeed, how you determine your indicator of success can be based on something you have done in the past, or maybe you do some research and you're just, because let's say you just joined Twitter, for example, and you have no idea how much, what's the realistic view or number of views, or you can just ask a colleague who has done this in the past. But anyways, it's what I want to say is it's also okay just to start somewhere and it's not always data driven, especially if you're just starting, right? Because you don't have any information to base it on. So that's just an example for us. And the altmetric score of 20 is something that has worked for us in the past, and that's why we decided on this. About data collection tools and approaches, since we are doing a tweet, yes, we are going to use Twitter Analytics and altmetric score because we are measuring the altmetric score. And now let's move to our example. This is a tweet of a blog shot that we posted on 17th of June. And as you can see, we have tried to implement some of the nice tips and tricks we learned throughout the course, such as use of hashtags and tagging collaborators. In our case, these are the two main authors of the review. We have an image, which is the blog shot. We have tried to use layering. You have the short tweet, the blog shot with a bit more information, and a link to the full review for all the information. And we have implemented the certainty of the evidence. So now let's move to evaluation. In Twitter, if you click here on the graph bars, you move directly to tweet analytics per tweet. So here we're not going to discuss the whole Twitter analytics part of Twitter, which is, it's a whole, it's a different ballgame. But here we're going to keep it simple just for this tweet. How many times the tweet was seen and what's the engagement. That's what you see if you click on the bars. And if we look at the impressions, we can see it's a little over 4,000 and we wanted 2,000. So let's say, wow, we have achieved our short-term outcome. That's pretty good. And if you're interested in engagements, which is actually also a really nice way and a measurement that you can use in your evaluation plan, it's also really simple. You just click on view engagements and you can see, for example, likes or retweets or link clicks or click on the image. So something, it's a nice measurement to keep in mind. And now I'm going to tell you a bit more about altmetric score. It used to be called just altmetric score. Now they changed the name to altmetric attention score. Doesn't matter. Each review has one, and it's here, red, you see on the right side. And if you click on it, you get the score very big, 21. So yay, we have achieved our short-term outcome. And the score is blue because most of the attention we're getting is from Twitter. And if you click on Twitter demographics, I realize it's a bit small, but you can see also geographical breakdown and occupational breakdown. And it's something that you can also use as a way to measure your outcomes if you're reaching a geographically more diverse audience, for example. Especially useful since Twitter removed this feature from Twitter Analytics some time back. And you can actually also measure, if you click on Twitter here, you can also measure the potential amount of Twitter people on Twitter you're reaching. And in our case, over 300,000, which is, of course, wow, that's amazing, right? Of course, there is no way to know whether you have reached each of these people, but it's a good way, it's a good metric to keep in mind what your potential reach is. And if you're interested to know more about the score and how it's calculated, you can just go to the altmetric homepage, and then you can read more about it. And now, after we have discussed our short-term outcomes, let's move a bit further. Let's see what could medium-term outcomes and long-term outcomes be. And I'm going to start with the medium-term. So in our case, we say, okay, after a short-term, people know the review has been published, and now let's go one step further. We want them to download the review, and we want them to cite the review. So that's, we thought, very logical medium-term goal. And as a long-term goal, I really like how Stephanie introduced this part, because it's so true, right? It's a long-term goal. In our case, review findings are applied in practice, and this is, it's amazing. Don't we all want our reviews to be applied in practice and lead to better healthcare in the end of the day? Though we also have to be realistic and keep in mind that it first might take a while, or it's not per se super easily measurable. But that's why it brings me to the beginning of our presentation. It's also okay to start small. Okay, so back to our medium and long-term goals. Something to keep in mind here when we talk about these outcomes is that it's absolutely fine to think about a reasonable timeline. Like when we were talking about the short-term outcome, and our example was on Twitter, And social media, everything is so dynamic, right? So we post something and within, let's say a few days or a week, we have reached our views and our attention. But when you have a medium-term or long-term outcome, that's of course not realistic to expect that within a few weeks you will have all the downloads and all the citations, or the citation in the very important guideline. So that's something to keep in mind and say, to stay realistic. I'm going to achieve my medium-term goal within a year or 2 years. So that's completely fine to give yourself some time. And now let's move to the indicators of success and how are we going to measure this? What will be our data collection tools? For our medium-term goal, it's very logical to collect the number of downloads and the number of citations, basically because our outcome was review will be more downloaded and more cited. And as in the long-term goal, indicator of success is, let's say, we want our review to be cited in the most important guideline in infertility. And how are we going to collect this? The medium-term outcome. If you receive the impact reports from Wiley, which should have, I think they were sent last week, then you have all the information there per year for each review. How many downloads, how many citations. If you want to track citations in real time, you can do this with other tools. For example, Scopus, but for this you need institutional access. And if you want to find out if your review has been cited in a guideline, we're very lucky that Cochrane UK is frequently searching for this information. So if a review is cited in a guideline, you will find this information on the landing page on the Cochrane library on the right side, very close to where the Altmetric score is. So as I mentioned, just want to stress again that when you do your medium-term and long-term goal in your plan, it's completely fine to give yourself a bit more time. So since our review was published a couple of months ago, I still don't have the data on our medium and long-term outcome. So this is just a made-up example, but let's hope we get it. And I would like to end my presentation with a few top tips, which are top tips for evaluation, but as you go through them, we'll go through them together, you'll see there are also top tips for knowledge translation. So basically, the take-home message is knowledge translation and evaluation go hand in hand. They go together. You can't have one without the other. And the more knowledge translation you do, the easier, hopefully the more streamlined also evaluation will happen with time. And as Stephanie said in the beginning, you will save resources. When you do evaluation, you will see where your work makes more impact, where doesn't. For example, you can stop that and invest your time somewhere else. And this goes hand in hand with knowledge translation, with the products and materials that you create. And as top tips, be specific. Think about your stakeholders, your patients, clinicians, researchers. What are your goals? Because depending on what you want to achieve, there will be different things you're going to measure, or even the other way around, which brings me to a very important point. If you look at the simple evaluation plan template, even though we started explaining from the top, you can certainly start from anywhere you want on the template. You can even start from the data collection methods if you prefer. Say that you have a colleague who is a guru in Google Analytics, then you can use that, and perhaps instead of focusing on social media, you can focus on writing a website or a page, and then you can use Google Analytics to evaluate your impact. Collaborate and be active, as active as you can, of course, and as your time allows, but collaboration is really important. And in social media, this can mean something as simple as tag important institutions, organizations in your community, or Cochrane Library and Cochrane. That has worked for us quite well. And I have an example, actually the blog shot I just showed you. We posted it a few days later at a different time, tagging the Cochrane Library, and received double the attention. So this can be really helpful. It can increase your visibility. Try to use visual content if you can, blog shots or pictures. That's We have studied this, we have learned about these things throughout the course. It has been proven that visual posts attract more attention. And very important, don't be afraid to experiment. This is especially important if you're thinking, yeah, so what if I'm doing something and I realize, oh, it's not really working. I'm not reaching what I want to, I'm not achieving what I would like to achieve. Is there something I could do about this? And yeah, there's certainly things you can do. And that's one of the reasons why you're doing evaluation, right? As Stephanie said in the beginning, to try things out, to see what's working, what's not. You can certainly try different things. You can keep it simple. For example, on social media, try to post at different times. Maybe that works. Maybe your community is in the States, but you're based in Europe and you cannot, they're missing your post, for example. That can happen. And don't worry about, oh, do I have to get up at weird times? Just use a social media management platform like Buffer or Hootsuite. There are different ways you can schedule tweets. You can tweak them. You can try different hashtags. You can, as I mentioned, tag different people and try if that works. You can certainly try different platform. We're still talking about social media. We realize that not everyone is on Twitter. In our community, most people in gynecology and fertility are on Twitter, so that's for us, it's really helpful. But we understand that's not the case for everyone. So you can try a different platform, Facebook, Instagram, certainly all of these social media sites, they have enough ways that you can track the visits, and like I showed you for Twitter. So that's certainly something you can do. And yeah, try different approaches. For I can give you another personal example from our group. When we did Endometriosis Awareness Month on Twitter with a hashtag, we joined the campaign, and we were expecting more attention, since we had received really nice attention before for another campaign, Polycystic Ovary Syndrome Awareness Month. And unfortunately, for us, we didn't see, our posts were not that popular. We found out by using Twitter analytics. However, at the same time, we had posted a dedicated page on our Cochrane group, and it happened, it's still today the most visited page, and we know this from Google Analytics. So now we know when we're going to do endometriosis awareness, we're not going to focus so much on Twitter, but we are just making sure that our website is up to date and we advertise that more. So that's just an example from our practice. And don't forget that tools, analytics are just a tool, but it's a good way to start. It's relatively straightforward and user-friendly. And yeah, just keep it simple. And yeah, hopefully you find these tips useful. Thank you.